The conference room went silent as the client auditor read from page 17 of our SOX compliance contract. His finger stopped at section 4.3. Final certification authority resides exclusively with the Director of Compliance. No exceptions. No delegation. My new boss, Brandon, turned white. He had spent 6 weeks telling everyone I was replaceable. That my 10% raise request proved I was not a team player. That he could handle compliance himself. Now, a $12 million deal hung on my signature alone. I watched his jaw clench. Game over. Let me back up and explain how I got here. My name is Dara, and I am 32 years old. For the past 7 years, I have been the Director of Compliance at Stratham Financial Services. We are a mid-sized investment firm in Chicago that manages portfolios primarily for healthcare organizations, hospitals, medical groups, nursing home chains. Our specialty is understanding the complex regulatory environment those organizations operate in and helping them invest their endowments and reserves wisely. My job is to make sure we follow every single rule, every regulation, every compliance requirement. SOX compliance, SEC filings, audit preparation, contract review. I am the person who reads the fine print, the person who catches problems before they become disasters, the person who stays up late making sure every box is checked and every form is filed correctly. I love my work. I know that sounds strange to some people. Compliance is not glamorous. Nobody dreams of growing up to review regulatory documents, but there is something deeply satisfying about creating order. About knowing that because of my diligence, our clients can trust us. About preventing catastrophes through careful attention to detail. My typical day starts at 7:30 in the morning. I arrive before most of the office, grab coffee from the break room, and settle into my desk. The first thing I do is review overnight regulatory updates. The financial world never sleeps, and rules can change while you are sleeping. I check multiple government websites, industry newsletters, and legal databases. Then I coordinate with department heads across the company. I make sure everyone understands what is required of them from a compliance perspective. I manage a small team. 3 compliance analysts report directly to me. Jennifer is 28, sharp as a tack, excellent at document review. Marcus is 35, came from a legal background, great at interpreting regulatory language. Amy is 26, our newest hire, enthusiastic and detail-oriented. They are good people. They work hard. They trust my leadership. The office culture at Stratham has always been collaborative. We are not a huge company. About 60 employees total. Everyone knows each other. We do casual Fridays. We have a company softball team that plays in a recreational league every summer. The CEO, Thomas Stratham, founded the company 23 years ago. He built it from nothing. He knows every employee by name. He remembers birthdays. He is the kind of boss who will roll up his sleeves and help move office furniture if needed. Thomas has always respected my work. About 4 months ago, we had a surprise SEC inquiry. One of our clients had raised a question about some historical filings, and the SEC decided to take a look. It was not an accusation of wrongdoing, just a routine follow-up, but it could have been a nightmare if we were not prepared. I spent 2 weeks preparing for that inquiry. I pulled every relevant document. I organized everything chronologically. I briefed Thomas on every potential question they might ask. When the SEC investigator arrived, I walked him through our entire compliance framework. He spent 3 days reviewing our systems. At the end, he found 0 issues. 0 findings. He actually complimented our organization. Thomas was thrilled. He pulled me aside after the investigator left and said, "Dara, you are invaluable. I do not know what I would do without you." I felt proud. I felt seen. I felt appreciated. That was 4 months ago. Last month, everything changed. Thomas called an all-hands meeting on a Tuesday morning in late September. Everyone gathered in the main conference room. There was an excited energy in the air. Thomas only called these meetings for important announcements. Usually good news. A major new client. A milestone anniversary. Strong quarterly results. Thomas stood at the front of the room, beaming. He had that proud father look on his face. He said he had an exciting announcement about leadership changes. He was bringing someone new into the executive team, someone who would help take Stratham Financial to the next level. Then he introduced his son, Brandon. Brandon walked in wearing an expensive suit. He is 28 years old. He had just gotten his MBA from a prestigious business school. Before that, he worked for 2 years at a major consulting firm in New York. He was moving back to Chicago and joining the family business as chief operating officer. Thomas could not stop smiling. He talked about how proud he was, how Brandon brought fresh perspectives, how Brandon would help modernize our operations, how this was the beginning of an exciting new chapter for the company. I looked around the room. Some colleagues were clapping enthusiastically. Others looked less certain. I caught Jennifer's eye. She gave me a slight eyebrow raise. Marcus was studying Brandon carefully. Amy was smiling but looked nervous. Brandon gave a speech. He talked about disruption, about efficiency, about moving fast and breaking things. He used a lot of business school buzzwords: synergy, optimization, scalability. He said he was excited to bring his consulting experience to streamline operations. He said there was always room for improvement. He said he was looking forward to getting to know everyone and understanding how we could work smarter, not harder. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. I pushed it aside. I told myself I was being paranoid. Thomas would not have brought Brandon in if he did not trust him. Brandon was young, but he was educated. He had experience. Maybe he would bring valuable insights. I should have trusted my gut. Brandon scheduled one-on-one meetings with all department heads during his first week. My meeting was set for Thursday at 2 p.m. I was actually looking forward to it. My annual review was coming up. I had prepared my materials. I was going to request a 10% raise. I had good reasons. Over the past year, my responsibilities had expanded significantly. I was now overseeing compliance for 2 new service lines we had launched. I had taken on additional regulatory reporting requirements. I had successfully navigated that SEC inquiry. I had researched market rates for compliance directors at similar firms in Chicago. I was actually below market rate. A 10% raise would bring me to the median. I prepared documentation. I created a presentation showing my expanded scope. I listed my accomplishments. I brought comparison data. I was confident in my case. On Thursday at 1:45, Brandon's assistant called me. He needed to reschedule. Something urgent had come up. Could we do it next week? I said of course. Things come up. I understood. The following Thursday, the same thing happened. Cancelled 15 minutes before the meeting. Rescheduled for the next week. Then it happened again. 3 cancellations in 3 weeks. Meanwhile, I overheard Brandon approving raises for 2 other department heads. I was standing by the printer when he walked past with the head of business development. Brandon was saying, "Absolutely, you have earned it. I will get the paperwork started today." That knot in my stomach came back. Stronger this time. The meeting finally happened in the 4th week of October. 4 weeks after Brandon had started. I arrived at his office at exactly 2 o'clock. I had my folder with all my documentation. I was professional. Calm. Prepared. Brandon kept me waiting for 20 minutes. I sat in the chair outside his office, watching him through the glass wall. He was on the phone. He saw me sitting there. He kept talking. At 2:20, he waved me in. He did not apologize for the wait. He did not hang up the phone immediately. He held up one finger in a wait gesture and continued his conversation for another 3 minutes while I sat across from him. When he finally hung up, he leaned back in his chair and said, "So, what is this about?" I explained that this was my annual review meeting, that I had requested it several weeks ago. I opened my folder and started to present my case. I had barely gotten through my first accomplishment when he interrupted. "You want a raise?" "Yes," I said. "A 10% raise based on my expanded responsibilities and market rate analysis." He barely glanced at my documentation. He waved his hand dismissively. "You are not ready for a 10% raise." I felt like I had been slapped. I took a breath. I asked for clarification. What specifically would I need to do to be ready? Brandon leaned forward. He said I needed to prove myself under new leadership first. He said every employee would need to demonstrate their value in the new organizational structure. He said compliance was important, sure, but it was essentially just checkbox work. Anyone could do it if they followed the rules. It was not like sales or business development where you had to be creative and strategic. I felt heat rising in my face. Checkbox work. Anyone could do it, he continued. He said I should focus on being a team player instead of asking for more money. He said that in his consulting experience, the best employees were the ones who thought about the company first and themselves second. He suggested I work on my attitude. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. He had another call scheduled. He stood up, indicating I should leave. He said we would revisit the raise discussion in 6 months. Maybe a year. I walked out of his office. My hands were shaking. I went to the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall. I took deep breaths. I had worked here for 7 years. I had built the compliance program from almost nothing. I had saved the company from regulatory disasters multiple times, and I was being told I was not ready, that my work was just checkboxes, that anyone could do it. I sat there for 10 minutes. Then I made a decision. I went back to my desk. I opened my employment contract. I had not looked at it in years. I read it carefully. My contracted hours were 7:30 to 4:30. Monday through Friday. 8 hours per day. 40 hours per week. For 7 years, I had routinely stayed until 6 or 7. I came in on weekends when needed. I answered emails at night. I was always available. I did this because I cared about my work. Because I was appreciated. Because I felt like part of a team. But that was when my contributions were valued. That was when Thomas was running things and understood what I did. Now I had a new boss who thought compliance was checkbox work that anyone could do. Fine. I would do exactly what my contract required. Nothing more. The next day, I arrived at 7:30 as usual. I worked steadily through the day. At 4:25, I started shutting down my computer. At 4:28, I packed my bag. At 4:30 exactly, I walked out. Jennifer looked up from her desk. Dara, are you okay? I am fine, I said. I smiled. Just following my contract hours. She looked confused. But I kept walking. The next day, same thing. Arrived at 7:30. Left at 4:30. No overtime. No evening emails. No weekend work. By the end of the week, people noticed. Marcus asked me directly if something was wrong. I told him I was simply aligning my work schedule with my contractual obligations. He studied my face. Then he nodded slowly. He understood. Brandon noticed too. On Friday afternoon, he sent an email, copied several people including Thomas. The subject line was, Team Commitment. The email said he had noticed some employees were being rigid about hours. He reminded everyone that Stratham Financial prided itself on a culture of dedication. That success required flexibility. That he expected everyone to go above and beyond. I read the email. I did not respond. On Monday, the head of portfolio management asked me to stay late to help prepare a presentation for a client meeting the next morning. It was a request that would have required 3 hours of after-hours work. I politely declined. I suggested we schedule time during business hours the next morning. She looked surprised but said, okay. Brandon heard about it. He sent me another email. This one was just to me. But he copied Thomas. He questioned my dedication to the team. He said he was concerned about my attitude. He mentioned the denied presentation help as an example of not being a team player. I responded professionally. I explained that I was happy to help during my contracted hours. I noted that my contract specified Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 4:30. I said I was committed to fulfilling all my contractual obligations. Thomas called me later that day. He sounded uncomfortable. Dara? Is everything okay? Brandon mentioned you have been leaving right at 4:30. I explained the situation. I mentioned the denied raise. the dismissive comments about my work being checkbox work, the implication that anyone could do my job. I said I was simply following my employment contract. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would talk to Brandon. He said he was sure it was just a misunderstanding. He asked me to be patient. I said I would. Nothing changed. The following week, I finally reviewed the contract Brandon had sent me. It was the Lakewood Healthcare Systems contract, a potential $12 million portfolio management deal. Lakewood was a large healthcare network with hospitals and clinics across 3 states. They were looking for a firm to manage their endowment and operating reserves. They had selected Stratham Financial pending compliance certification. The contract was complex. It included detailed SOX compliance requirements. Lakewood was a publicly traded company, so they had strict regulatory obligations. Any firm managing their money had to meet the same standards. The contract specified audit procedures, reporting requirements, certification processes. I read through it carefully. It was mostly standard language, but when I got to Section 4.3, which dealt with certification authority, I saw an opportunity. The original language said authorized company representative would provide final certification. That was vague. It could mean anyone in a leadership position. It could mean Brandon. I remembered his comment about compliance being checkbox work, about anyone being able to do it, about him being able to handle things himself. I rewrote Section 4.3. I made the language very specific. Final certification authority resides exclusively with the Director of Compliance. No exceptions. No delegation. Then I added subsections. Only the Director of Compliance could sign off on audit findings. Only the Director of Compliance could approve compliance reports. Only the Director of Compliance could authorize regulatory submissions. I made it ironclad. Then I sent the revised contract to Brandon for approval. Company policy required all contract modifications to be reviewed by relevant executives. Brandon was supposed to review and approve any changes. I waited. I expected questions. I expected him to notice the specific language about my exclusive authority. But Brandon approved the contract the same day. His email said simply, "Looks fine. Move forward." He had not read it carefully. He thought compliance contracts were boring. Checkbox work. Not worth his attention. The contract went to Lakewood Healthcare. They signed it 2 days later. It was now legally binding. I saved a copy in 3 different locations. Just in case. 3 weeks passed after the Lakewood contract was signed. The deal closed. Money transferred. Portfolios were established. It was a huge win for Stratham Financial. Our biggest new client in 18 months. Brandon sent a company-wide email taking credit. The subject line was, "Major win for Team Stratham." He talked about his strategic approach to client relationships, how his efficiency measures had helped close the deal quickly. He mentioned overcoming internal obstacles. That was a clear reference to me and my department. Thomas replied to the email chain. He praised Brandon's leadership. He said he was proud to see his son making such an immediate impact. He said this was exactly the kind of fresh thinking the company needed. I read the emails. I said nothing. I continued my 4:30 exits. Brandon grew more confident. He started implementing changes across the company. He called them efficiency measures. He cut training budgets. He reduced the hours for compliance staff. He told me my department was overstaffed. He suggested I could manage with 2 analysts instead of 3. I documented everything in emails. I stayed professional, but I also started updating my resume. I looked at job postings for compliance directors at other firms. I had calls with recruiters. I was not actively job hunting yet, but I was preparing. Some employees started going directly to Brandon with compliance questions instead of coming to me. He liked that. He would answer their questions without consulting me first. Several of his answers were technically incorrect. Not dangerously wrong, but not quite right either. Small errors that could accumulate into bigger problems. I did not correct him publicly, but I took detailed notes. I kept records of every incorrect answer he gave. Every procedure he modified without proper review. Every shortcut he authorized. Marcus noticed irregularities in some recent portfolio allocations. Small things. Percentages that did not quite add up to regulatory requirements. Risk classifications that seemed off. He brought them to my attention during our weekly team meeting. I reviewed the allocations. Marcus was right. They were not catastrophically wrong, but they violated specific SOX compliance provisions. They needed to be corrected. I prepared a memo outlining the issues. I sent it to Brandon as required by company protocol. All compliance concerns had to be reported to the COO. Brandon responded within an hour. His email said, "Noted. Will handle." I waited for follow-up. Days passed. Nothing happened. The allocations were not corrected. I sent a follow-up email. Brandon replied, "On my list." Another week passed. Still nothing. I documented the lack of action. I sent a third email, this time copying Thomas. I noted that the issues remained unresolved and requested timeline for correction. Brandon responded, copying Thomas. He said I was being overly cautious, that the issues were minor and would be addressed during the next quarterly review. He said I needed to trust his judgment on prioritization. Thomas did not respond to the email chain. I took that as implicit agreement with Brandon. Jennifer came to me privately. She said Brandon had told her to streamline the compliance checklist. He said some steps were unnecessary bureaucracy. He wanted to cut the process time in half. I looked at the steps he wanted to eliminate. They were not bureaucracy. They were legally required procedures. If we skipped them, we would be in violation of federal regulations. I had to override Brandon's instruction. I sent an email to Jennifer, with Brandon copied. I explained which steps were legally mandated and could not be eliminated. I cited the specific regulations. Brandon sent back a passive-aggressive email about resistance to change, about people who were stuck in old ways of thinking, about how progress required challenging assumptions. I did not engage. I simply stated facts. These are legal requirements. If we eliminate these steps, we violate federal law. If you want to change our compliance procedures, please provide documentation showing how we can maintain legal compliance while doing so. He never provided that documentation. The office tension was obvious now. People were taking sides. Some employees admired Brandon's aggressive approach. They liked the efficiency talk. They thought the company had been too slow, too cautious. Others were worried. They had worked with me for years. They trusted my expertise. They saw the changes as reckless. My team was completely loyal to me. Jennifer, Marcus, and Amy all started following my lead. They arrived at their contract hours. They left at their contract hours. They fulfilled their obligations perfectly, but they stopped going above and beyond. When Brandon sent after-hours requests, they politely declined and offered to handle matters during business hours. Brandon called it a compliance department rebellion. He complained to Thomas. He said the entire department had bad attitudes, that we were undermining his leadership, that changes needed to be made. I do not know what Thomas said to him, but nothing changed structurally. Brandon did not fire anyone. He could not. We were all doing our jobs perfectly. We were meeting every contractual obligation. We just were not doing extra anymore. On a Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock, Amy burst into my office. Her face was pale. She said Lakewood Healthcare had just called. They were being audited by a federal regulator. A surprise SOX compliance audit. The auditor wanted to review all documentation and conduct interviews. They were arriving Monday morning. I felt my stomach drop. This was huge. SOX audits were serious. If issues were found, Lakewood could face fines, sanctions, even criminal charges in extreme cases. And if we could not demonstrate compliance with our management of their portfolios, they could terminate our contract. We could lose the $12 million account. We could face our own regulatory consequences. Normally, this kind of news would mean I would spend the entire weekend preparing. I would pull every document, review every process, prep every employee who might be interviewed. I would work 30 hours over 3 days to make sure we were ready. But it was 3 o'clock on Thursday. I had 90 minutes left in my workday. Brandon was out of the office at a conference. He would not be back until Monday morning. Amy was staring at me. Dara, what do we do? This is massive. We need to prepare. Should I call everyone in for the weekend? I looked at her. I felt very calm. I said, we will prepare during business hours, tomorrow and Monday morning. Amy's eyes went wide. But Dara, this is huge. The whole account could be at risk. We need at least 20 hours of prep time. I know, I said. It is unfortunate the audit was scheduled with such short notice, but we will do what we can during business hours. Amy looked like she wanted to argue. Then she understood. She nodded slowly. Okay, what should I do right now? I started making a list. I prioritized the most critical preparation tasks. Things we could accomplish in one business day. It would not be enough for the thorough preparation I would normally do, but it would be what was possible given the constraints. At 4:30, I saved all my work. I closed my laptop. I went home. I spent the weekend trying not to think about Monday. I knew the audit could go badly. I knew there could be problems, especially with the shortcuts Brandon had been taking. But I also knew I had documented everything. Every concern I had raised. Every override of my professional judgment. Every instance where Brandon had dismissed compliance issues. If this went wrong, it would not be because I had failed to do my job. It would be because I had not been empowered to do my job properly. Monday morning arrived. I got to the office at 7:30, as always. The auditors arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. There were two of them. The lead auditor was a stern-looking woman in her 50s, named Patricia Hendricks. Her colleague was a younger man named David Chen who carried a large briefcase full of documentation. Brandon rushed in at 8:15. His hair was messy, his tie was crooked. He clearly had not expected the auditors to arrive so early. Thomas was already there, standing in the lobby looking worried. He was wearing his best suit. Gerald Carter, the chief financial officer of Lakewood Healthcare, arrived shortly after. He was a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes. He shook hands with Thomas and Brandon. He nodded politely to me. I had worked with him during the contract negotiation process. He respected my expertise. Patricia got right to business. She requested access to all compliance files related to the Lakewood Healthcare account. I had spent Friday organizing what I could during business hours. Jennifer, Marcus, and Amy had everything ready, in clearly labeled folders, both physical and digital. Patricia and David set up in our main conference room. They spread documents across the table. They began reviewing everything systematically. Financial statements, portfolio allocation reports, audit trails, certification documents. Brandon tried to take charge. He kept explaining how efficient our systems were, how he had personally overseen the implementation of streamlined processes, how Stratham Financial was at the cutting edge of compliance technology. Patricia ignored him. Every question she had, she directed to me. Can you explain your certification process for portfolio allocations? Can you walk me through your audit trail documentation? Can you show me your internal control procedures? I answered every question clearly and precisely. I knew our systems inside and out. When Patricia asked about specific procedures, I could cite the exact regulatory requirement we were fulfilling. When she asked about documentation, I could produce it within minutes. But then the problems started emerging. Patricia found one of the portfolio allocation reports that Marcus had flagged weeks earlier, the one with the irregular risk classifications. She frowned. She showed it to David. They conferred quietly. Patricia looked up. This allocation violates Section 602 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The risk weighting does not meet the required threshold for this asset class. Who authorized this allocation? The room went silent. Everyone looked at me. I pulled out my laptop. I brought up the email chain. I said, I identified this issue on October 19th. I sent a memo to our chief operating officer, noting the violation and requesting correction. The issue has not been resolved. I turned my screen so Patricia could see. She read the emails. She looked at Brandon. Why was this not corrected? Brandon's face flushed. He said he had determined it was a minor issue that could wait until the quarterly review. He said it did not pose any material risk. Patricia's expression hardened. There is no such thing as a minor SOX violation, Mr. Stratham. Either you are in compliance or you are not. This should have been corrected immediately. Gerald from Lakewood Healthcare was making notes. He looked concerned. Patricia continued reviewing documents. She found another issue. Then another. All of them were things I had flagged. All of them had been dismissed or delayed by Brandon. Each time, I produced my documentation. My memos, my emails, my requests for correction, my clear statements that these were compliance violations. Patricia's colleague David asked who had authorized the shortcuts in the compliance checklist. The ones that eliminated legally required steps. Jennifer had kept copies of Brandon's original directive. She provided them. Patricia reviewed the directive. She compared it to federal requirements. She looked at Brandon. These procedures are mandated by law. You cannot eliminate them in the interest of efficiency. Brandon tried to argue. He said his consulting experience had shown that many compliance processes were bloated, that there was always room for optimization, that regulations often lagged behind best practices. Patricia cut him off. I do not care about your consulting experience. I care about federal law. These procedures are required. Period. Thomas pulled Brandon aside. They had a whispered conversation in the corner. Thomas looked angry. Brandon looked defensive. Gerald was no longer just making notes. He was having a quiet conversation with his assistant on the phone. I heard him say, "Start preparing the contract termination paperwork. Just in case." Patricia said she needed to review the original contract to understand the authority structures. Someone brought in the signed Lakewood Healthcare contract. The one I had carefully modified, the one Brandon had approved without reading carefully. Patricia read through it methodically. She is a thorough person. She does not skip sections. When she got to section 4.3, she slowed down. She read it twice. Then she read it aloud. Final certification authority resides exclusively with the Director of Compliance. No exceptions, no delegation. She paused. She looked around the room. Who is the Director of Compliance? Everyone looked at me. I met her gaze. I am. Patricia continued reading from the contract. Only the Director of Compliance may provide final certification for audit findings. Only the Director of Compliance may approve compliance reports. Only the Director of Compliance may authorize regulatory submissions. She looked up. This is very specific language, very unusual. Most contracts say authorized company representative. This contract grants exclusive authority to a specific position. Brandon interrupted. I am the Chief Operating Officer. I have oversight of all departments, including compliance. I have the authority to make final decisions. Patricia shook her head. Not according to this contract. The contract does not mention the Chief Operating Officer. It specifically and exclusively grants certification authority to the Director of Compliance. She looked at me. According to this contract, you and only you can provide final certification for this audit. Is that correct? I met her eyes. Yes, that is correct. The air in the room changed. Brandon's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion. Then realization. Then fury. He understood. He finally understood what I had done. The clause I had embedded. The one he had approved without reading carefully. The one he had dismissed as boring compliance language not worth his attention. Gerald from Lakewood Healthcare leaned forward. So, the person who has sole authority to certify our compliance is the director who your Chief Operating Officer has been undermining for the past 2 months? Thomas closed his eyes. He looked like he aged 10 years in that moment. Brandon stared at me. I stared back. I kept my face neutral. Professional. But inside, I felt a surge of vindication. He had spent 6 weeks telling everyone I was replaceable. That my work was just checkboxes. That anyone could do what I do. Now the entire $12 million deal rested on my shoulders alone. His face hardened. He realized he had been outmaneuvered. He had underestimated me because he thought compliance was beneath his attention. Now that contempt had destroyed his leverage, the power in the room had completely shifted. Brandon tried to salvage the situation. He said the contract language did not matter. That organizational hierarchy superseded contractual specifics. That as chief operating officer, he had final authority over all company operations. Patricia cut him off immediately. The contract is legally binding. Both parties signed it. Lakewood Healthcare specifically agreed to these terms. I need the Director of Compliance's certification to complete this audit. Thomas tried diplomacy. Patricia, surely there is some flexibility here. This is an unusual situation. Perhaps we could work out an alternative arrangement. Patricia was unmoved. I work for the federal government, Mr. Stratham. I do not do alternative arrangements. The contract specifies who has certification authority. I need that person to review my findings and provide official certification. Gerald addressed me directly. Dara, can you certify compliance? Everyone looked at me. The entire room held its breath. I could see the calculation in their eyes. The $12 million account. The company's reputation. Thomas' relationship with his son. Brandon's pride. The employees' jobs. Everything balanced on what I would say next. I took a breath. I need 30 minutes to review all findings with my team. Patricia nodded. That is reasonable. Take your time. I stood. I looked at Jennifer, Marcus, and Amy. They stood immediately. We walked out of the conference room together. I heard voices rising behind us before the door even closed. We went to a smaller conference room down the hall. I closed the door. I looked at my team. We all knew what was happening. This was the moment. The culmination of 2 months of being dismissed, undermined, and disrespected. Marcus spoke first. What do you want to do? I appreciated that, he asked. He was giving me the choice. They all were. They would follow my lead whatever I decided. I said, I want to do what is right. Not what feels good. Not what is revenge. What is actually right. We spent 25 minutes reviewing every issue Patricia had identified. We went through them systematically. Most could be corrected. They would require work, but they were fixable. The portfolio allocation issues needed immediate remediation. The eliminated compliance procedures needed to be restored. The shortcuts needed to be undone. I made a detailed list of required actions. Timeline for each. Resources needed. I wrote it out carefully. Then we walked back to the main conference room. Everyone was still there. Thomas and Brandon had clearly been arguing. Gerald was on his phone again. Patricia and David were reviewing notes. I addressed Patricia directly. I cannot certify compliance at this time. Too many issues have been identified that represent material violations of SOX requirements. Gerald looked devastated. Brandon started to say something. I held up my hand. However, I continued. I can provide a comprehensive remediation plan with timeline for correction. Patricia leaned forward. I am listening. I presented my plan. I was clear and specific. Each violation. The exact steps needed to correct it. The timeline for remediation. The documentation we would provide. The verification process. Patricia reviewed my plan carefully. She asked clarifying questions. I answered each one. After 15 minutes, she nodded. This is thorough. This will work. If you complete everything on this timeline, I can return for a follow-up audit and provide certification. Gerald looked at me. What do you need to make this happen? This was my moment. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see what I would demand. I said, I need 3 things to ensure ongoing compliance. 1. Full authority to implement compliance procedures without override. 2. Adequate staffing and resources for the compliance department. 3. All compliance-related decisions must be approved by the Director of Compliance per the contract terms. I looked directly at Brandon. No more streamlining legally required procedures. Brandon exploded. You are blackmailing us. You created this situation. You wrote that contract clause deliberately. I kept my voice calm. I am stating what is needed to fulfill my contractual obligations as Director of Compliance. These are standard requirements for any compliance department. Thomas tried to mediate. Dara, let us discuss this reasonably. Surely we can find a middle ground. I am being reasonable, I said. These are not excessive demands. These are basic requirements to maintain regulatory compliance. If you do not believe me, ask Gerald. Ask Patricia. Gerald spoke up. She is right. This is standard practice. The compliance director needs authority to do their job properly. That is why we put that language in the contract. Thomas looked at Gerald. You wanted that specific language? Gerald nodded. We wanted assurance that compliance decisions would be made by compliance professionals, not overridden by business operations. We have been burned before by firms that let operational concerns override compliance requirements. That is why our legal team insisted on the specific language about the Director of Compliance having exclusive authority. Brandon turned on his father. Dad, you are going to let her hold us hostage? Thomas looked between his son and me. He was calculating. I could see it. The $12 million account. The federal audit findings. The reputation damage if this went badly. The cost of losing Lakewood Healthcare as a client. The potential regulatory sanctions. He made his decision. Everyone else, please leave the room. Dara, Brandon, stay. Patricia, David, and Gerald filed out. My team left reluctantly. The door closed. It was just the three of us. Thomas said. Tell me what happened. All of it. I want the truth. I explained. The denied raise. The dismissive comments about my work being checkbox work. The micromanaging. The overrides of my professional judgment. The compliance violations I had flagged that were ignored. The procedures that were eliminated despite being legally required. I showed him my documentation. The email chains. The memos. The warnings I had given. Brandon tried to justify his actions. He said he was trying to make the company more efficient. He said I was resistant to change. He said I was stuck in old ways of thinking. Thomas cut him off. You called her work checkbox work? Brandon hesitated. I was making a point about processes. About not being rigid. Thomas turned to me. Show me the contract. The clause you added. I pulled it up on my laptop. Section 4.3. He read it carefully. Then he looked at me. When did you add this language? After Brandon denied my raise and said anyone could do my job, I said. I modified it before sending it to him for approval. He approved it the same day. He did not read it carefully. Thomas looked at his son. You approved a contract without reading it. Brandon's face flushed. It was a compliance contract. They are always full of legal jargon. I trusted that the standard language was fine. You trusted wrong, Thomas said. His voice was hard. You approved a contract that gave Dara exclusive authority over a $12 million account. And now we are in a situation where she holds all the leverage, because you did not respect her expertise enough to read what you were approving, Brandon argued. I was trying to improve operations. To make us more competitive. Thomas cut him off. You risked a $12 million account because you did not want to give a highly qualified employee a well-earned raise. You called the work that keeps us legally compliant checkbox work. You ignored violations that could have resulted in federal sanctions. You eliminated legally required procedures because you thought you knew better than the compliance professional we hired specifically for her expertise. The room was silent. Thomas looked at me. What do you really need, Dara? Not demands. Not leverage. What do you actually need to do your job well? I told him. The raise I originally requested. Restored authority over compliance decisions. No more overrides without documented legal justification. Adequate staffing. Respect for my professional judgment. The same things I had asked for 2 months ago. Thomas agreed to everything. Every single item. Then he turned to his son. Brandon, you are suspended pending a review of your decisions over the past 2 months. Effective immediately. Brandon stood up abruptly. I will not work under these conditions. If she gets everything she wants, I am done. Thomas looked at his son for a long moment. His face showed pain, but his voice was steady. Then you are done. Brandon stared. You are choosing her over me? I am choosing the survival of this company over your ego, Thomas said. You created this situation through arrogance and poor judgment. You put us at risk because you could not set aside your pride long enough to respect someone else's expertise. That is not leadership. That is liability. Brandon grabbed his briefcase. He walked to the door. Before leaving, he looked back at me. His eyes were full of rage. You planned this. You set me up. I protected myself, I said quietly. There is a difference. He slammed the door so hard the walls shook. I sat very still. I could hardly believe what had just happened. Thomas looked exhausted. Can you save the Lakewood account? I took a breath. Yes, but I will need complete cooperation from everyone. You have it, he said. And Dara, I am sorry. I should have listened sooner. I let my desire to see my son succeed blind me to what was actually happening. I ignored your expertise because I wanted to believe he could do what he claimed. That was wrong. Thank you, I said. I meant it. The apology mattered. Let us go tell everyone the plan, Thomas said. We walked back to the main conference room together. Patricia, David, Gerald, and my team were waiting in the hall. Their faces showed curiosity and concern. Brandon was gone. They had clearly heard the door slam. We all went back into the conference room. Thomas addressed everyone. He explained that Brandon had been suspended, that I had been given full authority to implement the remediation plan, that everyone in the company would cooperate fully with the compliance department, that this situation had revealed organizational problems that needed to be fixed immediately. Gerald looked relieved. Patricia looked satisfied. My team looked proud. I presented the remediation plan in detail. 2 weeks for full compliance restoration. Specific tasks assigned to specific people. Clear verification procedures. Documentation requirements. Patricia reviewed everything again. She approved the plan. She scheduled a follow-up audit for 3 weeks out. Gerald agreed to keep the account contingent on successful completion. He said Lakewood Healthcare valued relationships with firms that took compliance seriously. He said our transparent handling of the audit findings actually increased his confidence in us. He respected that I had been willing to say we were not currently in compliance, rather than trying to hide problems. Patricia and David left. Gerald left. It was just me, Thomas, and my team. Thomas looked at us. Tell me what you need. We spent 2 hours going through everything. The compliance procedures that had been eliminated were restored. The budget cuts were reversed. I got approval to hire a 4th analyst. Jennifer, Marcus, and Amy all received raises. Thomas asked me to develop a comprehensive compliance training program for all employees. He wanted everyone to understand why these procedures existed. Then the real work began. My team and I worked systematically through every identified issue. This time I stayed late because I chose to. Not because it was expected, not because someone was demanding it, because I cared about the work and wanted it done right. Jennifer, Marcus, and Amy were energized. They felt valued again. They understood that their expertise mattered. Other departments cooperated fully. People who had been dismissive of compliance suddenly took it seriously. The near disaster had been a wake-up call. Brandon cleaned out his office that week. I never saw him do it. He came in early one morning before most people arrived. By the time I got there, his office was empty. Thomas told me later that they had a long conversation. That Brandon was going to work at a different firm in New York. That Thomas hoped eventually they could repair their relationship. But it would take time. I felt no satisfaction in his departure. Only relief. I had not wanted to destroy him. I had just wanted to be respected. 3 weeks later, Patricia returned for the follow-up audit. We were ready. Every issue had been corrected. Every procedure had been properly implemented. All documentation was perfect. Patricia spent 2 days reviewing everything. At the end, she provided full certification. No findings, no concerns. She actually complimented our thoroughness. Gerald from Lakewood Healthcare called me directly. He said he was impressed with the turnaround. He said Lakewood valued partners who could acknowledge problems and fix them properly. Then he said something that surprised me. He was increasing their portfolio allocation by $2 million. He wanted to deepen the relationship. Thomas held a company meeting. He publicly acknowledged my leadership and expertise. He announced my raise and expanded authority. He gave me a formal apology in front of everyone. He said he had failed to support me when I needed it, that he had let family loyalty override good judgment, that he was grateful I had been professional and principled even when I had every reason to be bitter. The staff applauded. It was not polite applause. It was genuine. Jennifer was crying. Marcus was grinning. Amy looked like she might burst with pride. The weeks that followed brought real change. Thomas promoted someone new to Chief Operating Officer. Her name was Helen Martinez. She had 20 years of operational experience at a larger firm. She respected expertise. She asked questions instead of assuming she knew better. She and I collaborated effectively. We developed new processes that were both efficient and compliant. It was what Brandon should have done if he had not been so arrogant. The company culture improved. People felt valued again for their actual contributions. My team thrived. Jennifer took on more complex projects. Marcus developed new audit procedures that other departments adopted. Amy became our go-to person for regulatory research. We hired a fourth analyst named Carlos, who brought fresh perspectives. I still left at 4:30 most days. But some days I stayed late by choice. I came in on a weekend once to help with an urgent client matter. The difference was autonomy, respect, understanding that my time had value, that going above and beyond was a gift, not an obligation. I had dinner with my best friend Sarah a month after the audit. She wanted to hear the whole story. I told her everything. When I finished, she asked how it felt to have won. I thought about that. I said it was not really about winning. It was about being valued for what you contribute. About not accepting treatment that diminishes your worth. About knowing when to stand firm. Sarah raised her glass. To standing firm. We drank to that. My team started asking me for career advice. Jennifer wanted to know how to position herself for promotion. I told her to document her accomplishments, to understand her market value, to be clear about what she wanted, to never let anyone make her feel guilty for asking for what she deserved. Marcus asked me how I had stayed so calm during the confrontation. I told him it was easier to stay calm when you have documented evidence, when you know you have done your job properly, when you have protected yourself through preparation. Amy said I had inspired her. She used to think being accommodating meant being weak. Now she understood that boundaries were actually strength, that you could be professional and kind while still refusing to be undervalued. Thomas called me into his office one afternoon, about 6 weeks after everything resolved. He thanked me again for handling the situation with such professionalism. He said he had learned an important lesson. That real leadership meant surrounding yourself with competent people and trusting them. That his desire to see Brandon succeed had blinded him to the actual value of the people already working for him. He asked me to help mentor the next generation of employees at Stratham Financial, to teach them not just about compliance, but about professional integrity, about standing up for yourself, about the difference between being a team player and being taken advantage of. I agreed. I never heard directly from Brandon again. Thomas mentioned occasionally that they were slowly rebuilding their relationship, that Brandon was doing well at his new firm, that he was learning humility. I hoped that was true. I had never wanted to ruin him. I had just wanted him to see me. Looking back, I understand what happened more clearly. Brandon came in wanting to prove himself. He wanted to show that his business school education and consulting experience made him valuable. But he confused confidence with competence. He thought knowing business theory meant understanding the specific complexities of financial services compliance. He dismissed expertise he did not possess because acknowledging it would mean admitting what he did not know. And me? I had spent 7 years being the person who went above and beyond, who stayed late and came in early, who answered emails at midnight, I did it because I loved my work and felt valued. But when that value was withdrawn, when my contributions were dismissed as checkbox work that anyone could do, I had to make a choice. I could keep giving more than I was valued for, or I could enforce boundaries. I chose boundaries. I did exactly what my contract required, nothing less, but also nothing more. And I prepared for the inevitable crisis by ensuring I held the leverage when it arrived. That embedded clause in Section 4.3 was my insurance policy. I wrote it knowing Brandon probably would not read carefully, knowing he thought compliance contracts were beneath his attention, knowing that someday his contempt for my expertise might create a situation where that clause mattered. I was not trying to destroy him, I was protecting myself. There is a crucial difference. Here is what I learned through this experience. Going above and beyond should be reciprocated, not expected. When you consistently give more than required, that should be recognized and rewarded. When it is not, when it is simply taken for granted, or worse, when you are told your work could be done by anyone, you have every right to recalibrate your effort to match how you are valued. Know your contract, understand your rights. Document everything. When someone in power dismisses your expertise, create evidence trails. Keep emails. Save memos. Record conversations when appropriate, not because you are planning revenge, but because you are protecting yourself. Understand your leverage. What unique value do you provide? What would happen if you withdrew that value? I was the only person who truly understood our compliance systems, the only person with the expertise to navigate complex audits, the only person whose name was on all our certifications. Brandon thought that made me replaceable. He was wrong. It made me essential. Strategic thinking is not manipulation. When I embedded that clause, I was not setting a trap. I was ensuring that if a crisis came, I would have the authority to handle it properly. It was professional self-protection. Brandon created the crisis by ignoring compliance violations. The clause I wrote simply meant I could not be bypassed when the consequences arrived. Use power wisely. When the moment came and I held all the leverage, I could have made unreasonable demands. I could have humiliated Brandon publicly. I could have destroyed his career more thoroughly. I did not. I asked for fair treatment, reasonable resources, professional respect. The same things I had wanted from the beginning. Revenge might have felt good in the moment, but fairness serves you better in the long run. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply enforce boundaries. I didn't sabotage Brandon. I didn't undermine him. I just stopped doing extra work for someone who did not value it. That was enough. His own poor decisions created the problems. My boundaries simply ensured those problems couldn't be hidden or ignored. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for refusing to be undervalued. Brandon tried. He called me rigid, uncommitted, not a team player. Those were manipulation tactics, trying to make me feel bad for expecting fair treatment. Don't fall for that. Enforcing your worth is not selfish. It is necessary. Your expertise has worth. Defend it. Whether you work in compliance or any other specialized field, you spent years developing knowledge and skills. When someone dismisses that expertise because they do not understand it, that is their limitation, not yours. Document your value. Make it visible. Ensure that when crisis comes, everyone understands what you actually do. The people who truly value you will show it through actions, not just words. Thomas said he valued me. He said I was indispensable. But when Brandon undermined me, Thomas did not act. His words were empty until the crisis forced him to choose. Real appreciation comes with support, with fair compensation, with respect for your professional judgment. Anything less is lip service. Know when to walk away. I updated my resume during those difficult weeks. I talked to recruiters. I was prepared to leave if necessary. That preparation gave me confidence. If Thomas had not supported me after the audit, I could have left. Sometimes your power comes from being willing to leave a situation that does not serve you. But sometimes, like in my case, preparation means you never have to make that choice. And sometimes, Justice comes from a single clause in a contract. Something small, something that seems insignificant when you write it. But when the moment arrives, when all the arrogance and dismissiveness and underestimation collide with reality, that small clause becomes everything. Brandon never bothered to read Section 4.3 carefully because he thought compliance was boring. That contempt cost him his position. That is the lesson. Never underestimate expertise you do not possess. Never dismiss the people who protect you from disasters you do not see coming. And never, ever approve a contract without reading it carefully. You never know what clause might matter when everything falls apart. I am still at Stratham Financial. I still love my work. I now have the respect, resources, and authority I need to do my job well. My team is strong. Our clients trust us. Our compliance program is better than ever. And every time I review a contract, I think about Section 4.3, about how sometimes protection comes from words on a page that nobody thought to read carefully enough. The clause that destroyed Brandon's position did not destroy him. He is doing fine in New York from what Thomas tells me. Maybe he learned humility. Maybe he learned to respect expertise. Maybe he learned to read contracts. I hope so. But that is his journey now, not mine. Mine is here, with my team, doing work that matters. Being valued properly. Leaving at 4:30 when I choose to. Staying late when I choose to. The difference is everything. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt undervalued at work? Where someone dismissed your expertise or took your contributions for granted? How did you handle it? Did you enforce boundaries like I did, or did you take a different path? I would love to hear your story in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and sharing them helps others who might be going through something similar right now. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories about standing up for yourself and knowing your worth. And if you want to hear more stories about workplace justice, family dynamics, and people who fought back against unfair treatment, subscribe to this channel. There are so many more stories to share about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength when they needed it most. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe a friend who is being undervalued at work. Maybe a family member who struggles to set boundaries. Maybe someone who needs a reminder that their expertise matters, and they deserve respect. Sometimes we all need to hear that standing firm is not selfish. It is necessary. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. I hope it gave you something to think about, something to carry with you, a reminder that you have more power than you might realize. That documentation matters. That boundaries protect you. That expertise has worth. And that sometimes, a single clause written carefully can change everything. Take care of yourselves out there. Know your value. Protect your worth. And never let anyone convince you that your work is just checkboxes. It never is. Every job done well requires expertise, dedication, and skill. You deserve to be recognized for that. Until next time.